I am Alexandra, and I am a family constellation, systemic ritual, and shamanic practitioner and founder of modern ancestral practice. In 2020, I started interviewing practitioners and teachers around the world about ancestors, and I call this series Ancestral Conversations, and you can find many of them on my YouTube channel. And today, I am delighted to introduce to you Saskia. Saskia von Diest is the founder of Ecofluency. She is also a consultant, a facilitator, educator, researcher, and activist in this field. After completing her PhD in plant pathology, she held 2 postdoctoral fellowships in South Africa and UK, and she investigated quantum-based or subtle agricultural techniques and technologies that use sound, electromagnetics, catalytic substances, and human intuitive abilities in farm management decision-making. She also trained in family and nature constellations that introduced her to working with human ancestors and informed her nature communication work. And after 12 years of experience in teaching and facilitating in various forms, Saskia founded Ecofluency. That is a growing organization to promote the science, art, and practical magic of nature communication worldwide. Welcome, Saskia. This is so exciting to have you here on this Ancestral Conversations.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's a pleasure to be given an opportunity to talk about anything like this, which is so close to my heart. Because you mentioned ancestors, and the first thing that comes to my mind, like for many people, is blood ancestors, you know, the ones who are dead from our blood kin. But really, for me, ancestors are all of nature. And I'll speak a bit more about it in a moment. But one thing, if I'd like to just mention, is that I'm South African, and I'm sitting here in Wales, in the UK, and it's an off-grid farmhouse in this beautiful valley, in its own valley, and we're off-grid. So I've got a water heater on the roof. It's not our house, we're renting, but the water heater might make a few bangs in the background. So I hope that doesn't disturb, and that it might affect also the fact that we're off-grid and I'm using my phone might affect the internet. So please forgive any cutouts to anybody who's watching. I hope that the tech holds. And if it's okay to also mention, today is Freedom Day in South Africa. And so this means that it's a public holiday that commemorates the 27th of April in 1994, which was when the first post-apartheid elections were held. So Blacks and other non-whites were allowed to vote, and Nelson Mandela became president. And just to be clear, when I say Black, I mean that as a descriptive term. I know that in other countries, Black can be discriminatory or derogatory, but in South Africa, it's purely used as a descriptive term. And it's significant. Freedom Day is significant for me because I'm South African, and most people assume that I'm white if they don't know my background. But like Trevor Noah, I was born a crime. So I was born in spring equinox in 1986, on the 21st of September. And I'm the mixed race child of a German Protestant raised father from a background that comes from nobility, essentially, German and Prussian nobility, and a South African Indian Muslim raised mother from a far less fortunate background. And their vast cultural, personal, educational differences had a really huge impact on my upbringing in many ways. And it's really strongly influenced my work in terms of personal development, my work with ancestors, and my path in nature communication. So I mention this to give context to the day and to my background and why is this important to me. And just to mention one more thing, I've personally experienced racism from all angles, inside myself, towards others, against myself, within and against my own family. And I understand now that it's made me really strongly committed to healing any kind of internal, ancestral, sociocultural damage that privilege, whether it's white or class-based, as well as racism and sexism, all of these, the damage that that's caused in this world. So that really sets the scene in terms of my impulse for ancestral work in a way.
Absolutely. I was just going to say thank you for providing this background, because it so beautifully leads into that question, and it's almost a felt sense that I experience when you introduce your background, your ancestors, and you've started talking a little bit about what you believe ancestors are, how you perceive that that concept. So I would like you to ask to maybe expand on this a little bit. This is the first question I ask everyone I speak to. What are ancestors? How in your belief system?
It's a good question, because it's like, well, what is nature? In my work, people say, when you talk about nature communication, what do you mean? So it makes sense that when you talk about ancestors, what do you mean? So in my experience, you get ancestors and you get ancestors, because most people think of ancestors as being those of our blood who are dead. But being dead doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically healed, that you're made whole, or that you're willing and able to assist and support those who are still alive. So also, if we trace our lineages far back enough, when do we start to include other than humans? So when I talk about ancestors, I'm talking about those who are passed away or no more in physical form. And they include human and other than human, but they have filled the ranks, they have joined the ranks, not filled the ranks, they've joined the ranks of those who are wise, benevolent, kind, and whole. And that can include anybody. I mean, today we're going to focus a little bit more on human ancestors, probably, because that seems to be the theme also of your work and our shared work in terms of constellations. But when I think of ancestors, I also think of the microbes in my body, in and on and around my body. You know, they're living ancestors. I think about the sun. You know, we have that element of fire in our bodies as well. I think about the clouds and the wind and the rain and the hail. I think about the earth. I think about this desk even contains elements of what could be considered ancestor, because it contains the body of trees, and trees were here long before us. And in my work with nature communication, I'm undergoing currently an initiation with the elder tree. And elder, many people know her as the elderberry tree. She's older than any humans, alive or dead. And so she carries this ancient knowledge to be able to support me in my work and to support my healing and to support those who I work with, both living and dead. So it's a broad term, really. And there's more I could say about this, but I think that sets the scene probably enough for today's conversation.
Thank you. I share that view, and I think it was first time in South Africa when I was there in 2018, sitting with one of the sangomas at the prayer that they were doing, and the way how they were calling all the ancestors, naming all the animals, all the birds, all the frogs. That was my first experience of that concept of ancestors in such a wide way, and it resonated so much. I immediately went to, of course, because for me ancestors is those who give life, so those who pass on life. Everyone who needed to be there so that I have my life are my ancestors, and that includes, of course, all the beings. And for my ancestors to be there, there were other beings that allowed them to be there. And, you know, our Mother Earth is the one who allows all of us to be here, so the ancient ancestor. But then there were those who allowed Mother Earth to be here, so the ancestors of, you know, of Mother Earth. Yeah, so I resonate very much and share the view of a wider non-human ancestral field as well. And why do you think it could be a good idea to work with ancestors in some way?
Okay, there's a long and a short answer to that. The short answer would be wholeness, freedom, peace, abundance, fulfillment, joy. You know, we as the living are the latest iterations of an unseen but still active family system, much like the mushrooms of the same mycelium network or fruit of the same tree. And of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have individuality. We do. And maybe different to our long gone ancestors, we've maybe evolved in a certain sense in terms of complexity. Maybe we have access to different resources, but that doesn't mean we're better than our ancestors. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily healthier. You know, in some ways, some people would argue that we're more fragmented, we're less whole as modern people. And so that also means that there are some that have our predecessors in the last few hundred or few thousand years who are also not yet whole. And so we've inherited this trauma, we've inherited beliefs, ways of relating that do not necessarily belong to us, and have added to this burden that we carry of wounding. And part of the reason that I believe we're given life is to support those who are around us to become whole again. And so, and obviously for ourselves, first and foremost, that's our duty, that's our responsibility, and it's our birthright, you know. So my belief is that communicating with ancestors and working with them, building relationship, doing ritual, asking for their blessing even, can reveal what we no longer hold, that what we hold that no longer needs to be carried, and can reveal how to find that healing. So for example, so I did family constellations training with Tanya Meyerberg in South Africa in 2016, I think it was, or 2017. And that was really powerful. That was really helpful in understanding how I relate with the earth and how I've projected my wounding, my mother wounding, onto the earth. And that triggered a whole bunch of events which led to my own shadows coming to the surface, you know, and that meant that I realized I wasn't in right relationship with the earth. You know, I'm actually really small. I'm really young compared to her. I wouldn't say insignificant, because I don't want to downplay the power that each living individual has to make a difference in the whole. But I'd taken on too much of this belief that I was here to save the world. You know, and since I was a child, I really wanted to save the world and make a difference. And the long and the short of that is that a particular constellation that I did during that training, where Tanya facilitated, hit me like a brick in the face, basically, of how that perception was so wrong, and that I'd made my life's work about saving the world. And she didn't want me to focus on that. And it was like, well, who are you really trying to save? Your mother. Well, of course. I mean, any sort of averagely trained psychologist might be able to point to that. But if I'd gone to a therapy session, that would have been so different compared to the embodied work that Constellations offers as a methodology. To witness that played out as a living map makes it so much more impactful. And so that was one instance in which I had to remove that blockage, that belief system in myself and in my life, so that I could release the life force, energy, strength, power, vitality, prana, chi, however you want to describe it, that flows downstream from our ancestors, so that we can live the blessings of, and I say blessings, and it sounds so, some people don't like the word blessings, because it's like, what do you mean by that? Well, whatever gifts they want to give you that make you healthier and happier and more abundant, and not just financially, but in terms of quality of life, fulfillment, all of these things. It's, you know, our ancestors do wish to support us, at least those who are wise, benevolent, kind, and whole, those who are able to access the wisdom of nature in a collective way and speak to us, so that ourselves and also those around us can flourish. So my work with ancestors is to become whole, firstly for myself, and also to help them become whole, because they do not have bodies anymore. So by working with them, I'm able to do certain things that support them. And then that then frees myself and my ancestors and those living relatives around me from more pain, from suffering, attachment, entrapment to toxic patterns of relating. And that means I'm also less likely to spread the disease of these toxic ways of relating, which can, as a psycho-emotional cause, develop into physical illness to any descendants that I might have, but especially now in the present, to the ones who are next to me, my siblings, my cousins. So horizontally, it has a ripple out effect working with the ancestors. So by accessing that collective wisdom of humanity and including the other than human, I am able to access the deeper wisdom of nature. And it makes such a big difference, especially at this time, because the science is now quite, it's not yet that well known, but the work of people such as Ben Davidson and Rory Duff have helped to make more mainstream the fact that the Earth's magnetic poles have started moving, where they're moving towards each other currently, or they might completely swap over. This is a natural cycle that happens every, I think, 12,000 years. And when that happens, it means that the electromagnetic field of the Earth and the shield that it provides from cosmic radiation, from solar radiation, that has now dropped. And additionally, the solar system's own electromagnetic shield has also dropped. And the galaxy's electromagnetic shield has also dropped as we move through what is described as a galactic current sheet. And what that means is that we're able to feel on many levels increased number of coronal mass ejections. We have a number of M and X class flares that have happened. I think on Sunday alone, we had something like 20 in the same day, which is unheard of. We have supposedly, there's predicted to be something like over 1,000 that the Earth is experiencing this year alone, whereas something like in 2018, we only experienced something like 200. And what that means is that our bodies are being exposed to more solar and cosmic radiation, but it also exposes us to more light, photonic light especially. And as that enters the Earth's atmosphere and hits our bodies, on a spiritual level, it's upgrading our DNA. So we're able to hold more light. And in the 2 newsletters most recently that I sent out for Ecofluency, I shared the message that I got when I tuned into my guides, and I asked them, like, what do I need to do now? You know, there's that famous poem, and I can't remember the poet at the moment, that rage against the dying of the light. And it's well known, and it's a brilliant poem. And that's often circulated in my mind for years and years. And then specifically a few weeks ago when that message came through, it was so clear of like, you don't need to rage against the dying of the light. You're invited to step into the light and become the light. So let go of that anger, let go of that rage that's holding you back. And this is now the gift that our ancestors are offering as well. It's like they've also experienced these changes in the pole shifts and the drops in electromagnetic shields. And maybe there were different iterations of civilization previously, you know, different to mainstream narratives about our history. But regardless of that, what we're experiencing now is something that's really strange. It's something that's probably happened very few times in Earth's history, where all 3 electromagnetic shields that protect us from radiation from, you know, the outer cosmos as well as from the sun have suddenly dropped, and we're exposed to so much. And it explains why so many people are experiencing things coming up in them from past life experiences or traumas, ancestral wounding, their own trauma, early childhood experiences are coming up, and they're feeling more emotional. They might be feeling more physically tired, and that's all understandable. It's necessary now. We have the knowledge, we have access to gifts and to resources to equip us and empower us to fulfill our responsibility of managing our own healing and to support those who also need our help, such as the ancestors.
Thank you, Saskia. That's an excellent description of why one would want to begin working with ancestors. You mentioned benevolent and whole ancestors, and that led me thinking about a question that might not have been part of the list that I've sent you, but it's around fear. And what I've heard in my practice is people asking, but isn't it dangerous? Or isn't it unwanted? Are we disturbing the dead? Are we going to anger the dead? And am I going to basically get in trouble for doing this? What would you say to this?
That's an excellent question, and it feeds very much into the work I do with Ecofluency, which focuses very much on safety and personal well-being when you're working with humans who are living or dead, actually, but including with other than humans. And in every single tradition where ancestors are considered as guides, where they're revered, where they're consulted, the same thing is always the case, where it can be very dangerous working with ancestors. And a quote that I got from Dr. Daniel Furr when I did his ancestral medicine course at the beginning of last year is that attention is food. And if you're giving it out, there are a lot of hungry souls. So every single one of us has many thousands, like hundreds of thousands of ancestors, really. It depends on how far back you want to count it. And it's important to be aware that not every single one of those either wish to engage with us, or that they wish to engage with us and may not yet have joined the ranks of the fully healed ancestors, and therefore might not realize that offering their guidance is maybe in line only with their own agenda. They might not realize what is really aligned with your highest and deepest good. So their advice might seem helpful, but it could be misaligned with what you truly need. In the worst case scenario, you've got ancestors who might have in their energy field something attached to them, toxicities, maybe some harmful energies, entities, and depending on the language you use, there could even be something like what in some cultures is called demons. And so in some cases, if you've got really unhealthy ancestors, then they need some help before they can join the ranks of ancestors. So that's not something that everybody has the skill to do. And I would very much not recommend any beginner to just go and start talking with their ancestors without some level of guidance and some knowledge. So the long and the short of it is that if you might have ancestors that need some healing, but I would recommend getting some support with that. So it could be that developing healthy relationships with your ancestral guides needs the support and the knowledge of facilitators who are trained, because it can be a very vast landscape. Well, it is a very vast landscape, actually, with no map that clearly fits your particular situation. You might end up looking at your lineages and thinking, it's not safe either way, whichever way I turn. So how do I look for an ancestral guide? And so this is where it makes a lot of sense to have somebody else to help you in it. And so in terms of a very efficient way, I really like the work of Dr. Daniel Furr, because whether you want to work with, doing a course with him, or if you just want to do it on your own with his book, Ancestral Medicine, that's also good, although there are many other facilitators who work in a safe and efficient way in terms of ancestral healing. And then there's also the work of Amy Jo Ellis, who essentially channeled this work around the Court of Atonement. So that's something that is also interesting, those people that resonate with that. I mean, in some ways you could be doing it like that, but if you don't really resonate with working with ancestors directly, you can still do a huge amount of good by literally facing your own shadow, making peace with your own pain, because it's so much easier to want to help others and distract yourself and feel good about yourself by doing so and saying, well, I'm doing the ancestral healing work and therefore that makes me a good person. But if you've not dealt with your own internal issues, arguably it's going to be incomplete work eternally, because your pain is also their pain. It's often so much of it is inherited. And so healing yourself means also healing them. So if you choose just to work with a psychotherapist and address your own internal issues, your trauma, your wounding, how you relate with others, that in itself can be enough. One doesn't have to have complex rituals where we, commune with the dead. Not everybody resonates with that idea. So I would say go with what feels right, and do so from a place of feeling resourced, of feeling in tune with your heart, strong, also giving yourself enough time if it feels like it's too much of a time burden, it can feel rushed. And the moment that comes into play, there might also be other beings who see this, the intention of wanting to connect, but you not maybe being fully ready to connect in the right or healthy way. And then it could be that your telephone line gets hijacked or hacked, and you end up having other beings presenting themselves as your ancestors. And this is part of the reason why so much of the work that happens in ancestral healing work is first setting up safe boundaries, because really those safe boundaries are values in action. As I can't remember who said that right now, but I find that really relevant right now in terms of, if you're going to, Randy Buckley, that was somebody that Daniel Furr mentioned in terms of boundaries of values in action. If you want to look after yourself, sometimes you have to say no from a place of connection, of love, of first looking after yourself, because otherwise you're not doing anybody else any favors. If you are placing yourself almost in a way of being a martyr to try and help and heal your ancestors, but then you get hurt in the process. So yeah, I would recommend that you go carefully, slowly, with patience, with as much trust in yourself as you can, and with gratitude, because of the fact that you even have a life and you have any inclination to want to make a difference. That is beautiful in itself. And to go at a pace that is nervous system friendly. It doesn't help anybody if you hurt yourself in the process and you go too fast. That's quite a long answer, but I hope that speaks to what you were looking for.
Yes, and beyond. And this answer also kind of leads nicely to another question. Listening to what you've just been sharing, I can imagine that some people who have maybe no experience, no background with ancestors or any type of framework or approach might feel a bit overwhelmed and going, as a why you say there are all these benefits, but then you say actually it's so dangerous that you might not want to do it and go ask somebody else, because it just might not be safe. So I'm just wondering whether there is, in your experience, a simple step that somebody with completely no experience but a lot of curiosity, and that for me ancestral work is very much about longing for connection, longing to belong, to connect, to be part of that wider field, especially if the immediate family may be not always completely supportive. It's nice, it's such a good feeling when you have all those hands on your back holding you and you can literally lean back and feel that support. So if I want that, but I'm not sure if I want to go into all of this kind of that maybe even scares me a little bit or overwhelms me, how do I bridge this?
That's a big and excellent question. What I would say is that for myself, I've often felt like I don't really belong. And that's also because, as somebody with a European father living in South Africa and not even feeling like I belong, even though I was born in Johannesburg and was raised in the Western Cape, I never really felt like I belonged in South Africa either. And then moved to England for a relationship and never really felt like I belonged here either. So what is it that I'm really longing for? Is it human connection? Is it connection with myself? Is it connection with other than humans? Is it just wanting to be loved and to love? So what's underneath that longing? And I don't even know if I still feel like I've gotten anywhere in terms of that. What I realized is it doesn't matter where I am on this earth, even if I were, God forbid, to be sent to prison, for example, it's just another place on earth. It's still a place on our beloved earth. I would still have access to the air, and to water, to the ground, maybe to fire, don't know. And yes, this work is overwhelming, and it took me years to be able to come to a place of even being willing to entertain the idea of getting here. I took part in family constellation workshops, short ones and multi-day ones for about 2 years probably before I considered doing training. And yes, it is dangerous. And my goal with saying that is not to scare people off. It's to say that, yeah, it is dangerous, a bit like driving is dangerous. But instead of saying don't drive, rather say, well, you can learn how to drive safely, and there are certain, rules to navigating on the road. This is, how to read that sign and that sign. So go out and do the thing, but do so safely. And that's really a theme throughout my work, is to, rather than putting people off, is to say, careful, please go do it, but be careful in the process. You won't know the rewards you get without trying. It's a long and an arduous journey at times, but it's more deeply rewarding than if you don't start. So for myself, I had a wound for most of my childhood and much of my adult life, where I thought of humans as a plague on the planet. And I thought, I don't want to have any more connection with them. Less so even with my ancestors. I had all kinds of issues with my father and mother before healing those wounds and having better relationships with them. So I didn't even want to relate with the ancestors at all. I thought I didn't even want to be alive at many points in time. I thought, why am I here? Is it so difficult? Why can't I just exit stage left or right? Just exit. And so my entrance into healing myself and to being able to move towards the ancestors with any amount of respect and desire and love and understanding was through other than humans. I've loved the earth since my earliest memory. I love her more than any living human. I'm in love with her in a way, and with the sun in ways that I would never be able to describe in words. And that's an access to love that becomes a doorway towards healing. And so in Ecofluency, when I do these courses, I teach people these 9 steps that are the basic principles of communicating with any aspect of nature. And I've had people ask me, well, can I use the same also with my ancestors? And sure, you can. It's a bit more complex and it might be a bit trickier, but you can. And that's the only way I know how to support others in doing this in a way that is safe, effective, meaningful, and is resourceful if you have an issue with humans, living or dead, like I've had. And if you feel overwhelmed, many people find it less threatening being able to go and sit in the earth and feel that that is resourceful, or put their back against a tree, or cuddle their dog or their cat. There's more companionship and love that we sometimes feel from the other than human than from our humans around us. And so they can teach us so much about breaking down the barriers to love. And in that way, make it an indirect path towards the loving relationship that we can have with human ancestors. So I share that because that was my path, and it's been very painful at times. Like, I don't know how to put it into words. Not that others haven't had that kind of pain. It's not like, my pain and suffering is no less or no more important than others. But maybe it helps those who feel overwhelmed to hear that. Equally, some people feel that they don't feel safe in nature. And so they feel that they would like to connect first more with humans before they can even connect with trees and plants and animals and the water and the wind and the sun and the stars and the microbes. So I would say follow your heart in this and follow what feels right, if it feels right at all. If you are not ready in this lifetime to address that, that's okay. Know that there are others around you who might be doing the work that you know of or not, and that all will happen in its right time. At least that's what I've learned, is that it all happens in the right timing. You're not going to be given more than you can handle. I believe. And when you are given more than you can handle, it's only because you think you can't handle it, but actually you can. Because God or nature, the universe, or the great forces that be out there, they know better than us. And they guide us. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'm very grateful for how deeply you've shared. From a very deep place. I felt as if something shifted, like as if we dropped to a different level of conversation there. I also felt I wanted to add that in my practice, in my experience, connecting to ancestors doesn't need always to be about healing. It's also about just having fun. And I think that's where I agree, and I resonate around. There are ancestors who would like to engage with you, and there are those who wouldn't. So in this case, just keeping it simple and calling on the one that wants to engage in a good way, with compassion and love, and then just, for example, have a dance.
Yeah.
The first time I danced with ancestors, I realized that it never occurred to me that I've never had an opportunity to dance with my living grandparents, when they were alive.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen. It wasn't part of somehow, it was never a thing. So when I was dancing and I invited my grandparents to dance with me, I just suddenly went into this, how come we never did this before? And it was so much fun. And I'm sure that some sort of healing must have happened in that place, but it wasn't about healing. It was just about hanging out, having the connection, and having fun together.
That's so wonderful that you share that, because it's so true. I mean, I have this habit as a Virgo. I tend to kind of go to the place of like details, and with, I don't know if anybody's interested in astrology who's listening, but like I've got my Venus in Scorpio as well, which means that I tend to go where it hurts in relationships and want to understand that and want to heal that. So yeah, I mean, a large part of why I do ancestral work is for healing, but you're so right. It doesn't have to be sober, solemn, or serious in order for it to be effective and to bring joy, because actually that's so much of what they would like as well, is that joy, that love, that connection, feasting and dancing. That's nourishes life and nourishes our soul, and it nourishes them. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. And the same is true for other than humans, by the way. They love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even more so, I think. Even more true than.
Hedonistically at times.
Yeah. Saskia, tell me about your practice. How does it look like? And if ancestors come into that, or if they don't, that's okay as well.
My work with ancestors waxes and wanes depending on what's going on in my life. For many years, it was family constellations as the lens through which I would get to know my ancestors, do the healing work, which is incomplete, by the way. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be done with that. Almost certainly not, because there's so many thousands of them. I'm just adding one small piece in the jigsaw puzzle of wholeness. And then it moved, because I found, maybe I got disenchanted with constellations, because I found, I mean, I won't go into the reasons for all of that, but I found like I hit a wall somehow for a while with it. And I found that the work of Dr. Daniel Furr with ancestral medicine made a big difference in moving things along in a much quicker way. And during his course, actually, two big things happened for me. The course was about 3 or 4 months long. Can't remember exactly how long. And smack bang in the middle of it, I had a tooth that I thought was starting to lose a filling. So I very urgently had to go and look for a holistic dentist, because I wanted a holistic dentist for many reasons. And I found one, and she's great. And so I was living in a friend's caravan at the time. on a biodynamic farm in East Sussex over winter. And so I had to find a way of getting to London in time for this emergency appointment. And she also said, before I come to the appointment, I have to arrange to have an X-ray, a 360-degree X-ray. And I'd never experienced this before. So we arranged that. I go to the dentist. And bearing in mind, this was also right in the middle of, it was winter. I was in the middle of this ancestral healing course. And I felt like there were some big things happening also in our family, with my brother and my sister and my parents, some really big things that just felt like completely overwhelming. So I go to the dentist and I sit with her and she starts walking me through what's happening in my life. She was describing the map of my trauma based on this X-ray. And she communicates with teeth and bones. And what she told me was that this particular tooth was related to family antagonism. And it wasn't a filling that had fallen out, that was a neighboring tooth. This particular tooth had been healthy, but in the last few weeks had started crumbling. It had literally within a few weeks started rotting and crumbling and falling to pieces in my mouth. And so I explained to her I'm doing this course, and she was like, oh, that's not surprising at all then. What else is going on in your life? Oh, these things are happening in our family as well. Oh, well, not surprising at all. Another reason why she did the X-ray, which would not have come up at any other point in my life, I imagine, is that she saw that there were holes in my jaw, in the bones of my jaw, from that were called cavitations. So a cavity is a hole in your tooth, and a cavitation is a hole in your bone. And 14 years ago, I'd had my wisdom teeth removed around the same time as I'd had my tonsils removed. And they have never healed, those wounds, because when they remove a tooth, they leave behind a periodontal membrane. If they do a root canal, they'll leave it behind a periodontal ligament. And so what it means is that you've got this dry cavity where this membrane lines it, and there's not enough blood filling the space so that new bone can fill the space, because it's the signal, there's like messages that the body gives when there's blood filled. It's like, okay, we can have the lymph, the white blood cells, and all the other materials filling up the space to create new bone. That didn't happen in my case. Instead, I had these like 1 centimeter deep holes in my jaw that were filled with like all kinds of gross things, and were constantly pumping out toxins from the bacteria living in there that had given me all kinds of sinus issues, bacterial issues in my gut. Was starting to release certain toxins that were causing inflammation in my brain, which had explained so much of the previous year's issues. And it was because of doing this course that it was the catalyst for me finding out about these cavitations. So she arranges to do cavitation surgery for me. But it was such a blessing to have that offered, that level of physical personal healing happen on such a quick way. Incidentally, cavitation surgery can take up to 2 or 3 weeks for you to even be allowed to eat solid food again. Once whatever's cleared out has been cleared out and you get sewed back up together, within 1 week, I was able to eat solid food again. Within about 2 weeks, I felt as if I'd never even had surgery after my jaws had been swollen up, and I literally had surgery in my bone, clearing out toxins from 14 years. So all kinds of gunk. It was really gross. I won't go into details. But the point was that it was within about 3 weeks after the operation, I was able to eat dairy and gluten, which I'd not been able to eat for many, many years because of the dysbiosis and the issues that were happening in my gut as a result of these cavitations and the bacteria living in them and the toxins they were pumping out. So that was huge for me to shift. Really, really huge. And at the same time, the other really big thing that happened, apart from this massive operation, jaw operation, which seems, I mean, I'd make it maybe much bigger than it really was, but it felt really significant for me at that point in my life. Another really big thing is that the ancestral guides that I met at that time, and it was one being that spoke with the voice of many. And she gave me a name and she said, this is the name. When you want to call me, use this name. Don't tell anybody else this name, but this is the name. And she also, so one of the practices that we were learning in this course were, what do you need me to do to help nourish you? Because obviously ancestors don't have physical bodies other than living through us. And she said, I need you to drum And I said, well, I don't have a drum and I don't drum. I've never done that. I'd like to learn, but I don't know how. She said, get a drum. And I asked, how do I get a drum? Well, put the word out there that you want a drum. At this time, I also, having just had this operation and having just founded Ecofluency and am living in somebody's caravan, didn't have the money to buy a drum, which felt at the time quite frivolous, like this little, this ritual object I have to pay money for. And so she said, well, just put the word out there. So there's a WhatsApp group for the town that I was living in. And I just put it out there. It's an alternative minded community, relatively speaking. So I just said, hey, everyone, my ancestors have told me I need to drum and I don't have money for a drum. Does anybody have a drum they want to give me? Thinking like, I'm going to sound like I've lost my mind. I sound nuts. Who's going to just give me a drum? A minute later, a guy messages back privately to me and says, I have this really massive deer drum. You're welcome to have it. And this is the drum. And there's no way I would have been able to afford it otherwise. And so this beautiful drum came to me purely because the ancestors had asked me to find a drum. And they had said, we need you to drum to feed us. That's what helps nourish us. And so I did. And it was really amazing to learn a little bit of drumming. And it's not like I'm proficient at it at all. I just know the basic, like boom, boom, boom. But it was incredible to experience the relationship of me being able to feed them and them offering their blessings through my life as well as a result, and to give thanks and to enjoy it. And so a few times after that experience of being gifted this drum, I went with a friend of mine to the woods and we sat at full moon around fire and we drummed. And I've never done anything so witchy before. It was like, I'm not that kind of person really, but it was a really, really wonderful experience. And it doesn't have to feel, like it's a pagan ritual in order for it to be nourishing. It can be as simple as lighting a candle or pouring an additional glass of red wine at the table for your ancestors and then offering that to the earth. It doesn't really matter. So those were two examples of how ancestors made a big difference in my life and how my practice happens occasionally. And sometimes because my ancestral guide, one of them, sits on my spirit team, my guardians, guides and allies crew, then she will speak often. And sometimes I can address her particularly, and sometimes I ask that her, together with all my other guides, speak with one voice so that I don't get mixed messages about when I'm asking for any kind of guidance in co-creating my personal life or my work going forward in terms of practical life management, practical decisions. Yeah.
Fantastic. You've answered a number of questions that I had in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk a little bit about what you do with Ecofluency, what your work is?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I consult. And the other thing currently that I do is I teach. And the consulting is where I work with individuals or with groups, collectives, organizations to bring the voice of nature to the table as a stakeholder. So as an active voice, as an respecting the agency of nature in informing the decision-making process that happens in a person's life or with their work or in an organization. And I currently have a few clients where I communicate with the spirit of the organization and with the allies, the nature allies that support that organization, and find a way forward so that it truly is working in like real harmony with nature, rather than guessing at like, how can we be more in harmony? Well, you can ask, what does nature want to need? How can you meet those needs? And how can nature meet your needs? So that's one of the things that I do is consulting. And another thing which I really enjoy doing, because I believe that it's empowering people, is rekindling people's ability to communicate with nature, all of nature, any aspect of nature. And so I do various kinds of trainings and courses, more like trainings, workshops and courses at the moment. So I've got like these really micro workshops, like a few hours long, that I'll do at festivals. I'll sometimes do like 2 hour long Zoom micro workshops and talks occasionally. And the thing that really works well for me is a 3-day course or a 6-week course. And so the 3-day course is where I teach this 9-step Ecofluency guide for communicating with any aspect of nature to the participants. And they're always relatively small groups so that there's enough attention being given to individuals. And I make sure to always honor those who grow our food. So farmers, beekeepers, food gardeners are given reduced price tickets at these courses. If I do in-person workshops, farmers come for free, for example, and beekeepers come for free. I haven't done that many in-person workshops this year, partly because I'm now living in Wales and it's really far away from everything else. But last year when I was living in East Sussex, there were like a few times a month I would sometimes do workshops, and they were really, really nourishing. And I also learn a lot from the people that I share this with. So the 6-week course, for example, is where we cover this 9-step guide in communicating with nature. And then we also explore deeper aspects. How do you really refine your intention when you're working with nature and understanding your motivation? What really is the boundary between yourself and others? When you're talking about relating, you're talking about communicating between two individuals or two groups. But where do you end? Where does the other start? And we explore ideas about your own nature, your own ecosystem with your own body. We explore why it's important and what it means to ground, maintain, clear, contain your energy field, why that's important, and things like that, and various other aspects as well. I am also currently working on a pre-recorded course, which will make sure that Ecofluency is available at a lower cost and to a wider audience. And I hope to release that in a few months' time. Initially, it was aimed for May. I don't know when next I'm going to do that. I have in the back of my mind this idea for a book as well, Ecofluency book, which I'm working on. In the meantime, I'm focusing on the teaching so I can share this work with as many people as possible, because really every single human, like you can communicate with your ancestors, you can communicate with all of nature. This is our birthright. This is our duty even. And it's one of our greatest blessings and gifts is to be able to relate with all of life and beyond. So for example, in 2 weeks' time, I've got a 3-day online course coming up. And so anybody who's interested can buy tickets to that. And I think you'll be able to add the link. I mean, that's on my website. If you go to the tab where it says teaching and events, then you'll find the details for those courses there. And yeah, I also do tailored work with people. So there's one girl of 11 years old, and her mom has decided that she would like me to do one-on-one sessions with her on Zoom. So I tailor that to meet her pace and her needs and her interests. And that's often the case with all of my work. I try and make sure I'm meeting the needs of the other as much as possible. And of course, there's always safe boundaries, there's always confidentiality, there's always space to share and to offload what's going on for yourself in your life at the time, because that also feeds into our relationship with what's going on in terms of personal development and in our ways of relating in our life. So that's some of the work that I do with Ecofluency. But you mentioned in the beginning that it's an organization, and yes, it is an organization, but it's still really small. It's still just currently like just me. Like this is Ecofluency headquarters right now, this office. But I promote the work of others. It's another big part of my work that I forgot to mention is I promote the work of others in the field. So in my newsletter, I have a section at the end called Other Voices in the Field. And so there I introduce the work of either beginner or experienced nature communicators and how I got to know them, what work they have in their field, anything that they would like to promote through it as well. And as always, all of my work, and we did this in the opening, I do a little energetic opening when I do any kind of online work, and Alexandra knows this very well. We did this before we started recording this interview. and I'll do it at the end as well, but I'll mention it now just for the sake of completion, is that all of my work with Ecofluency always aims to serve greater love and harmony for all of life on this earth and beyond, throughout all time and dimensions. And so hopefully that's a big enough umbrella to say that it's going to have as big of a positive impact and as wide an impact as is possible and is appropriate.
Thank you, Saskia. That's the work that you do is absolutely beautiful. I know it from experience. I've been lucky enough to have this gift of working with you. It's really lovely. We are going to draw to a close, but before we close, I was just wondering if there is anything else that might want to come through right now that you would like to add as we end this conversation about ancestors.
Well, I'm going to just listen to hear if anything that my ancestors would like to share right now with any listeners in this interview. So the words that come through that I hear are, as our evolution converges at this point in time, with all the pressures that we're meeting, let love be your guide. Let truth be the power and the strength. Stay in your heart. Find joy. I think that's all they want to share. Yeah, they're like, yeah, that's good enough. That's enough for now.
Stay in your heart and find joy.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful ancestral message.
Simple, relevant. Not like it's necessarily easy always, but it's a good invitation. It's a big enough invitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alexandra, I'm so grateful that you've let me chat so much. I mean, if you put me on a soapbox, I will talk for ages about any topic related to ecofluency. So I'm very grateful that you've given me this chance to chat about it and share.
And it's an absolute pleasure. I've learned a lot and I really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you for creating time to do this together. It's nice.
It's literally my pleasure. I love doing this. And I would love to extend any kind of blessings that are appropriate for me to share to you and to your ancestors and to all of those who are listening and to yours. May you be well with your people.
Thank you.